to the Martinus Cosmology podcast. We are broadcasting today from the Martinus Center in Klint. It's Good Friday. It's the Easter week where there are a lot of volunteers here doing a lot of practical work to maintain the center. And there's a program of lectures in the evenings where we hear the center's lecturers, and in the mornings we hear Martinus giving his lectures on tape. One of the lecturers we have had this week was Sören Grind, and Sören is my guest today. My name is McGovern, and I'm your host. Sören Grind, welcome.
Thank you.
Sören, you're a psychologist and a very experienced lecturer on Martinus, and you are the author of 2 books in Swedish and Danish on what you've called cosmic psychology. The first one, which we could call in English Life as Your Mirror, is about human evolution in the perspective of reincarnation. And the second one is called Life, A Question of Love. Neither are translated into English yet, I'm afraid, and perhaps later we will have another podcast with you on cosmic psychology. But we thought about talking today about health and ill health in the perspective of spiritual science. So, Sören, what is the difference between materialistic and spiritual science in relation to health?
Well, you could say you have a much broader perspective on illness. Because when you think about reincarnation, you have the experience that there are a connection between lifetimes. So you move up with a spiritual perspective to our spirit, and you conclude that this spirit is eternal. So our body is kind of a document of a very specific historic time in our evolution. And here we have gathered experiences in our consciousness, but also, in fact, in the history that our body tells about our constitution and physical constitution, but also mental constitution. And from that perspective, we are more or less receptive to illnesses, depending on the status of our consciousness, mental climates, and also our physical status that is, as we said, connected to many lifetimes. When it comes to the materialistic science, we can be extremely grateful, I would say, about all the knowledge that has been gathered in history. We know so much about the functions of the body, the organs, the cells. We have a lot of medication, and we have surgery that is fantastic help if you break your leg and so on. With this spiritual perspective, we also start to think about the soul as the primary cause of all the things going on in our body, because we move to the spiritual aspect, and that in fact is also moving to the electric, that we are electrifying our body from our consciousness. So the consciousness is what is keeping our body alive. So when we die, for instance, there's a kind of a short circuit in the body, there's no electricity. And so when we do a brain scan, we can see there's a lot of electric activity in the brain. That disappears when we die. And that is in fact showing us that there is a consciousness that is the activating life force within the system of our organs and so on. So we have to go to that level to understand cause and effect.
And so the thoughts are electric. I know the American writer Walt Whitman talked about the body electric. So it's an old poetic idea, but it really has a physical and spiritual reality. Thoughts are electric. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So when you see the body deeper and deeper through science, you see that there is electricity all the way around. You go down to the molecules and so on. There's electricity. And where does this life force come from? As we said, when we die, there is no life force. So there is something keeping us alive that is connected with this electricity. And in the same time as our life force disappears, we have no awareness in the body. We are gone, so to say. So there's a deep connection between the electricity and the consciousness. And when you study, like you have this MRI scanning of the brain, you also see there's a connection with what we are thinking, the feelings we have in different areas in the brain. So we can clearly see there's a connection between thoughts, feelings, and electricity in the brain. So that's a way of looking at it.
So our thoughts have an influence on our health. Are there some thoughts that are healthier than others?
Yes, absolutely. And that's, you could say, the future science. Many people are already really studying this. And we know, for instance, about placebo, that it is a fantastic medicine. It's probably the best medicine we can use. And some scientists are really studying how can we use this positive way of looking forward to become good, get your health, or the positive expectation that you can have for the result of a medicine. You see, it is so fantastically strong, this force of our thoughts. So sometimes you see that, I know there was an investigation about women that had problems with vomiting and feeling bad when they were pregnant. And then they used some medicine, and 9 of 10 became well. It really was a good medicine. And then they compared it with placebo, and 9 of 10 also became well with placebo. So you could see the effect was this, you say, ritual of taking the medicine, and you get your doctor's prescription and so on for this medicine. So the problem is that when you realize that, you cannot use that medicine anymore. So you could say the future medicine will really be a question of how can we have this positive outlook? How can we have these positive thoughts to be really a tool for creating health in our own body? It's easier with this kind of hypnotic suggestions that we do in these rituals than in an aware, conscious way create this state of mind. But that's really a science that is growing right now, I think.
Yes, we talk about the science of psychosomatics, and that is a field that's really growing. And for me, it seems to be just at the beginning, that we're very much taking the first steps in understanding the connection between body and mind, thinking and health.
Yes, and yes, absolutely, we are in the beginning. And still we can see there are so many fantastic investigations about this. And even with a thing like operating your knee, when you have big problems with pain in your knee, and even there they have made these surgeries where they have it's placebo surgery. Really? So they see a film that is on this monitor, and they see an operation, and they cannot see their knee, so they think they are operating their knee because they have anesthesia. So they can see that they can have fantastic result without doing anything in the knee.
How amazing.
Yes, so thoughts are really doing something in our system. It's a good help, but how to manage this from within? That's a big, interesting question.
Yes, and how to do it reliably and repeatedly and scientifically so that it works every time and so on. Rather complicated, I imagine.
Yes, and I guess when Martinus talks about prayer, for instance, you can really see in his way of talking about it that there we are really like small children when it comes to understand the power of prayer. So I guess here, if you just look like a common everyday thing, reaction we often have when we have pain in the body, it's kind of irritating, and we are disturbed. We think it is an obstacle for our life, and when we think negatively about a problem in our body, it is like sending a negative energy into that part of the body, because the body is really correlates with our way of thinking about it. So you can also see that when you really think about a part of the body, it activates the blood stream. So you can get warmer when you think about getting warmer in a part of the body. So you can really influence different parts of the body. So if we are very disturbed and irritated about a part of the body that has pain, it's like if you can understand right, anti-prayer. And if we just in our everyday life work with changing these reactions, so instead of getting irritated, we look at it as some helpers. All these cells are our best friends, and they are shouting to us, help, help, help me. And we can have this relation when we experience pain, that, okay, God bless that area of my body, and send warm, caring thoughts. I think that's the way of building up the good placebo effect, that we become kind of a providence for our micro beings and help them when they cry for help.
But I think when a lot of people get ill, then they feel very stressed because they can't live up to their obligations. They have a job, they have appointments, they have children perhaps, they have obligations to a husband or a wife or a partner or friends and so on, and they have to cancel all these things, and maybe they can lose their income and so on. So there's a lot of stress associated with being ill. So perhaps it's difficult to find the peace and quiet to focus on what Martinus calls one's microcosmos, these living beings that live within us, and send this love and care to these microcosmos, because one is so concerned about the outer ramifications of being ill and the financial and relational consequences of it.
Yes, and I think here we also have to have this broader perspective, really take the helicopter up and see in a long-term perspective. And the real long-term perspective could also be, why do we have illnesses? What's the purpose? The spiritual science tells us there's a purpose with everything. Everything has a meaning. And you don't hear that when you go to the doctor generally, that this is a learning process. But that's what the spiritual science tells us. And you could say when it comes to suffering, in an overall perspective, suffering is a process that helps us to understand other better. We have more empathy where we have ourselves experienced suffering. So many people that, for instance, have had an illness like cancer, for instance, after that, when they have become healthy again and life is better, when they meet friends that go through the same process, they can be the best helpers because they understand them. And that is, you could say, one example of why suffering has a purpose in this evolution, where we go from being animals that have been living on killing each other to survive, and to where this human part, the real human being, as Martinus talks about, where we are totally involved in this neighborly love. So in this process we have to become awakened also to be aware of our micro beings. And so illnesses is kind of a call from the inner world of organs and cells, a wake-up call. And when we experience suffering, we understand other people better, And most people today also, they start to study. They start to use their brain. What's going on in my body? I want to understand why I'm ill and so on. So sometimes I meet doctors who could say that, well, some of my patients, they know more about their illness than I do. And so people are very interested in understanding, and maybe they don't ask God, they ask Mr. Google, and they find a lot of knowledge about their illnesses. So intellectually and emotionally, we grow and become more aware. But not only for our friends and the illness itself. Gradually it will also make us more emotionally aware of these organs and cells as living beings. That they are really they should be our best friends. If we think about this heart beating all the time just to make it possible for me to, what a gift, so to say, with all our organs. And in a way, I would say it's a miracle that we get up every day and we can breathe, we can look with our eyes, we can use our hands, and we can eat. And all these functions are really so beautiful gifts from nature. So in a way, you could say that's where also we will become more and more aware by virtue of illnesses or ill health, that we have to be the best providence for our organs and cells, and that is an initiation process, Martinus says. And in a long-term perspective, we cannot create health without feeling love to our organs, our cells. So that's another perspective on the purpose with ill health.
Yes, Martinus describes all living beings as consisting of life within life, within life, within life. So within us we have organs, as we know, and cells and molecules and even smaller particles. But they're not just dead material, they're all living beings that have their, to be biblical, it says that we live and move and have our being within the organism of God. So if we look at ourselves, then we are a micro being within the earth, which is a micro being within the solar system, which is a micro being within the Milky Way, and so on. So all these levels of cosmos are alive and experience their life within us. So they're absolutely dependent on what we do and what we think for how they experience life.
Yes, and as you said, when we look at life as life within life, it's really a question of consciousness communicating. We are communicating with the consciousness of our organs and our cells. So that's why you also could say that it's not only these aspects that our thoughts and consciousness, it's an electric activity, it's in fact also communication with this inner world. So to be aware of that this is communication, the emotions and the thoughts that I have is kind of a life force that is really communicating with these fellow beings within me. That's quite another perspective.
Yes, so if I have a pain in my knee, for example, then it's the micro beings in my knee communicating with me, saying there's something wrong and I ought to do something about it, or change something, or stop doing something that I'm doing wrong.
Absolutely.
So it's a cosmic connection, really, a microcosmos to macrocosmos.
Yes, yes. When we look at ill health from this perspective, we also kind of come away from this way of looking at illnesses as something that is just happening. Often if you go to the medical science of today and ask, but why do I get ill? You often get a kind of a attitude that, well, we don't know, it's a coincidence, or it just happens. I'm sorry, you are hit by this illness. But if we have this reincarnation perspective, we are the creator of our body. We have created it through a long evolution. And all the experiences from past lifetimes, the way we've been living, the lifestyle we have had. If we, for instance, have been drinking a lot of alcohol in past lifetime, we know from this lifetime we see a person drinking that it's a kind of a degeneration of their body, it's a degeneration of their consciousness also. You are not so smart when you're drunk, so to say. So it does really happen something with your brain. And everything that we do continuously, we continue and we build up habits. It does not only change the physical structure in our body now and the organs of the cells from that we see now in this lifetime, it does, says Martinus, also influence what he calls the talent kernels for creating sound organs. So if we have a long lifetime with a lifestyle that is kind of hurting our system, like alcohol and so on, then there will be an effect also to the next lifetime. But if we look at it from day to day, we say that if a person has been drunk one day and he wakes up and he has this big headache, we don't say that he was just hit by the headache. We see, oh, okay, you drank yesterday, so now you have this problem with your headache. We see a cause and effect, but when it comes to this larger evolution, we don't see it with our physical eyes, but we can learn through spiritual science to see, okay, there is something that is not functioning so well in this person's body or soul. There must be a reason. Is there some lifestyle that we can see is connected with this kind of effect? And there we can start to learn that different lifestyles give different life force in different organs and in the totality of our body, so to say. And we have there the possibility to be more and more aware of how to create health and work with preventive medicine. Now we sit and we don't know the causes, and we have to fix when it's so bad that you really have an illness in your body. But from the future will be more and more interested in see what lifestyles create certain illnesses, what thought climates create certain effects in our body, in our soul. Can we work on creating an immune system psychologically and physically that makes it impossible for us to be ill, so to say? That is really the most important science.
Yes, and I imagine that's a process that takes many, many lives to build up 100%. Martinus talks a lot about the effect of food. You mentioned alcohol, but he also talks about food and smoking, and we see today a lot of research into the effect of different ways of eating on our lifestyle. There's a lot of interest in doing research into meat eating, compared with vegetarianism and veganism. And Martinus points to a development and evolution of our nutrition from meat eating to vegetarianism to veganism. And this seems to be backed up by current research. And there seems to be a strong movement among the young people today towards veganism. Do you have any comment on that?
Yes, as you said, it's Martinus' worldview tells us about an evolution from the animal kingdom to the real human kingdom. And in a way, it's an evolution, he concludes, that is going away from the killing principle to the life-giving principle. And we experience that as becoming more and more humane. So there has really been a fantastic evolution that we all often forget when we look at the news and so on. If we go back 100 and 200 years ago, there were so much more wars going on and killing going on. So it's a very peaceful part of history we are living in now. And we don't really look at it that way, because in the news we have all the knowledge about who is killing who, so why they did it and so on. But it was quite another life living as a Viking. And there they had the ideal that they should be a victor, have this victorious fight with the other Vikings and kill them. That's the way you came to heaven. So it was, the consciousness was filled with more, as Martinus says, energy of gravity, this explosive energy. And they could also then, in their digestive system, they had also another power to digest. So we can see we have been moving from just eating the raw meat to we needed to cook it or boil it. And now when people are so humane that they don't want to kill the animals themselves, it's because this consciousness that we have today is often so humane that we don't want to live at the expense of other beings. And when people today become more aware of how the animals are living in these factories for creating meat, and also aware of the global challenges we have with pollution, it is kind of a shift, I see this right now going on, where this natural resistance towards killing is really becoming aware. Because earlier we've had this psychology of meat eating that we have kind of pushed it away. So there is this beautiful lecture with Melanie Joy, a psychology professor, who's talk about carnism. And she starts her lecture with showing a lasagna, I think, with meat and so on, a plate. And she asked the audience, is this a plate that you would like to have and eat this dinner? And most people raise their hand, yes, of course, it looks beautiful. And then she says, well, I just want to tell you that the meat in this lasagna is made of golden retriever. And then, as you understand, immediately people take their hands down. They don't want to eat that. And that's a very interesting example of some parts of this planet, people eat dogs. That's no problem. And here we eat pigs and cows. But what's the difference? It's a kind of a psychology that we are creating these defenses, that we push away all these empathy that we have for the animals to be able to continue our traditions. But as you said, today we know from medical science that it's not healthy with meat. Plant-based food is the best food for our health. So now it's really a shift in medical science and the attitudes, mostly by young people, but many people, also people, as we said, are interested in the global challenges with pollution. So it's really a shift going on, I think.
Yes, there seems to be a global movement away from meat eating. And I talked to someone in England when I was on holiday who said, yeah, you can't have a restaurant today without offering at least one vegan dish. So that's a big shift, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you then look at it from this evolutionary perspective, it's not only that we get out of this zone of killing animals, we are also getting out of a zone of killing within our stomach. And that's a perspective Martinus also tells us about, that the process going on in our digestive system is so different if you eat meat or eat fruits or vegetables. It's like you could compare it with if you go out and look at a slaughter field where people have been killing each other. It's a very unpleasant thing to see. Or if you go into a slaughterhouse, people don't like to be there. But if you go out to a field where they have been harvesting corn or vegetables, it doesn't bother you in the same way. And you could say it's the same thing going on in our body, in microcosmos. These small beings that are in the meat that we take in through the food, they are also in their life struggling for survival. I mean, that's quite another perspective. We haven't been thinking about molecules or proteins as living beings before. But Martinus, as you said before, we go down to microcosmos, it's life units everywhere, it's consciousness everywhere. So it's not only that we stop killing animals in our level as humans and plants and animals, but also in the microcosmos we are also getting out of this killing zone. And that is really making a shift for our health, because it's very big difference if there's a killing zone or if it's a digestive zone, so to say.
So when you try to digest meat, it involves killing on many levels. First you've killed the animal, and you have killed the organs of the animal, and you consume the organ, but then the cells and the molecules and the smaller particles within the organ have to be killed as well, so that the actual nutrition, and one can't deny there is some nutrition in meat, but so you can get access to the actual nutrition. So there's killing on many levels there. But Martinus describes that the pattern is much more harmonious when you digest, for example, fruit. That there are some fruits that involve no killing. In fact, they get life by being digested. And the vegetables and the coarser vegetarian products are somewhere in between.
Yes. So that's also where he connects this with our health, because it takes so much life force to digest and kill these small animal beings. And that drains us, in fact, from energy that should be the life force that creates health in our body. And the tricky thing is that the cause and effect has kind of a time process that it's not so easy to see the direct connection between cause and effect, because we have from nature, so to say, a strength with our system that makes it possible for us to live in an unnatural way, which Martinus says it is today for the humans of today to eat meat. We can do that for a long time and feel it's okay, but very gradually it diminishes our life force in these different parts of our body that is connected with the digestive system and so on. And it creates that the immune system is not so strong anymore. So illnesses can easier invade our system.
So the immune system should get stronger the more one goes over to eating plant-based food?
Yes, and again, as we said before, it's a long-term perspective. The same way as you can diminish your life force through eating meat, for instance. It could be a process over some lifetimes before you really get an illness. And creating health also takes, I would say, lifetimes if you have been really burdening your body, as most people of us have some different problems in our bodies now. So it's also, this perspective is not the quick fix idea so many times. It could be, and of course, some big changes. People do feel big changes often when they go to a plant-based food. But to really create a health that you have an immune system that makes it possible to really not be influenced by, for example, infectious diseases and so on, it takes some time.
I remember you gave a lecture once here at the Martinus Center where you talked about, you drew a curve showing, if I remember rightly, that you could have a lot of bad habits, bad in the sense that they weren't boosting the health of your organism. You could, for example, eat a lot of meat and drink and smoke and think terrible thoughts and so on, but you had no symptoms for quite a few lives. And then at some point you get symptoms. And the curve continued downwards. And then you reach a point where you start to go upwards again. You start to get healthy. You still have symptoms. And at some point you become free of symptoms. But for me it was a comfort because there are lots of people who are vegetarian and they don't drink and they don't smoke, but they're nonetheless ill. And for some people, this has been a paradox. How can I be so ill? I've I've eaten vegetarian food most of my life. I've never drunk. Don't even drink coffee and so on. And I exercise and I see to that I sleep at night and so on. But still, one can have various diagnoses. So I like that curve very much because it showed that the whole process of becoming ill and becoming healthy is a rather long-term task.
Yes, if you say that this curve starts with that we all have 100% life force, so to say, and it can take some lifetimes before it has really come to the point where the symptoms come. Let's just say we only have 50% life force. But when people do become ill, they often have this feeling of being hit by this illness. And then they kind of want to be hit by health. And they go to the doctor, or they want an outer medicine or something to give them health. That means that they continue often with their lifestyle, and then they can continue downwards to get more and more problems, and the life force is maybe diminishing to 30%. And if we have a change there, it's often a change in our consciousness in that way that we understand that, okay, it has something to do with the way I live. Can I do something? You start to take responsibility for your health, and you start to get knowledge, as we said before. And when you start to change your lifestyle and you become aware of your thoughts and feelings and start to work with this personal development, then gradually this life force is going up from 30 to 40 to 50, but maybe it's a question of lifetimes. So if we now here have some symptoms, like for instance, I had asthma, and it was activated in this lifetime when I started to smoke as a 13-year-old boy. So I could easily stop smoking because I had this effect with asthma. But it took some time before I had learned enough about myself, my body, the way I was eating, and also very much it was connected with the way I was thinking and my feelings. When I became aware of that and released some of the fear that was connected with the asthma, for instance, then my symptoms disappeared and I was freed from my asthma. And I think that was a process that maybe it was a repetition of some lifetimes, going from become aware of it and getting rid of it totally. So it's really a question of becoming aware and taking responsibility for your health, and have the patience to gradually grow in this sense. And
maybe we should explain this concept of repetition, because Martinus explains that when we reincarnate, we live life after life after life, but when we reincarnate, then the first 30 years or so are a repetition of our entire evolution through the animal kingdom. And we can see an awful lot of that repetition takes place in the womb, but towards our 30s, then we repeat the last few incarnations. So a lot of people change very much from the age of 20 to 30. You can change your interests, you can change your state of health and so on. I don't know if you have anything to add to that about this repetition, but we can say you're not physically fully grown until you're about 26, but you're not mentally fully grown until you're about 30. Then you're really born into this life. Then you start building up from where you left off the last time.
Yes, and I think this repetition process is a way of activating the, topics, the learning processes for this lifetime. Because in Martinus' perspectives, we have thousands of lifetimes from this evolution, from raising or standing up on two legs to where we are today. So it's a very, very long process. And of course, we cannot activate everything we have learned through all these lifetimes. And we have some topics every lifetime that we should work on. And for some people, it might be a focus also to take care of their physical body, this initiation process. And I would say also when it comes to these with illnesses and this learning process, it's also in this perspective a process that is fair. Many people could feel it's unfair. I'm so ill, and as you said before, I'm even eating very good food and working with my consciousness. But if you have this long-term perspective of many lifetimes, Martinus tells us that we all have to go through as much suffering, all of us, because we have to. That's necessary to become the same. We have to go through the same when it comes to suffering. So neighborly love is not something you could buy in the supermarket or in the church. It's a question of experiences through a long process. And it's the same thing when it comes to this neighborly love to your micro beings, organs and so on, your body. We all have to go through illnesses. Sometimes, lifetimes, it's very much. Sometimes it's not so much. And the repetition is a part of this activation process. What shall I have focus on to learn in this lifetime?
Yes, a lot of people can feel like they are the victims of their fate. And my only experience is that people who feel like they're victims can feel very, very miserable because they feel their suffering is meaningless. There's no meaning to anything. They go around saying, why me, why me? And it seems to create a sort of negative spiral of thinking that pulls them further down, perhaps into depression. And depression can have physical symptoms. You get stiff muscles, maybe a stomach ulcer or whatever. So victim consciousness, as I see it, is something important to look at and deal with. Do you have any comment on that?
Yes, absolutely. Because when we feel as a victim, we lose the power of our fate, or we think everything is just the cause of other beings or other outer forces. What can I do? I lose my power. And to feel powerless in combination with the stress that we experience when we have an illness, for instance, that's one of the, as you said, that's really a vicious circle. So we can feel, I think, when we know that I can really influence this situation, I have a possibility to do something, it gives life force in itself. We become stronger. So when we go around and dwell in these thoughts that I'm just a victim of what's happening and my fate is just a result of other people's wrongdoings and so on, it's really a vicious cycle that we lose so much energy, so much life force. So, well, this is a big chapter in one of my books about cosmic psychology, going from this victim consciousness to taking a sound responsibility for your fate and health and so on.
Yeah, and how do you get out of victim consciousness? Do you have a prescription for that or a recipe for that?
Well, for me, it has been totally decisive to study Martinus' works with the reincarnation process, because there you can see that I am the creator of my consciousness, of my body, and also my health. And it can maybe be tough to hear that, but it's also the most liberating thought you can have, because then you can take in charge your own life and your own health. As we said, it's a long-term perspective, but you feel much better when you know that you can influence your situation. So understanding reincarnation, that you're an eternal being and that you are the creator of your fate, it is this overview perspective that gradually will help us to release this victim consciousness. But I would say really gradually, because it is so natural for us to feel like a victim. If we look at the animals, all their senses is looking outwards. They don't have any contact with their inner world. So, of course, they are victims. If you look at a little child with their big parents walking around, moving around them and doing things with them, of course they experience themselves as a victim for these outer forces. So it is the natural way of experiencing life in the animal kingdom. So we cannot say to ourselves that now I just want to get rid of all my victim consciousness. It is really a process that maybe will continue all the way up to our cosmic consciousness.
Yes, it's not so easy to get rid of the idea that it's somebody else's fault, or it's bad luck, or the government's fault, or society's fault, or the environment's fault, or whatever. So one can feel helpless.
It is the most decisive shift for our evolution to really change this way of looking at life from victim consciousness to see that I have a possibility to change my situation. It is the healthiest thought you even can have, you could say.
Yes, and in that process, of course, you may need help. You need the doctors, the psychologists, the psychiatrists, the dietitians, all sorts of helpers on all kinds of levels, physiotherapists, whatever. You need all this help. But I often think of being a patient like being a soloist in with an orchestra or a band, that in a way you're on your own, but you have a backing group. You have to do the work yourself, but you can get help from your backing group. And I see doctors, dietitians, psychologists, and all those other helpers as my backing group if I'm ill. But I have to do a lot of work myself. If you want to be a soloist in an orchestra, with your own band, you have to practice.
That's a very nice image, I think. Yes.
So we have to accept. I think we have to look for the help that's out there, and even pray to get the help that one needs, and pray to get in contact with the doctor that can help you. Today, for example, the ordinary medical doctors know very, very little about nutrition. It's a tiny, microscopic part of their training. So you can't get much help there. So you perhaps have to go somewhere else if you want help with that, and so on.
Yes, and I think it's, if you have problems with your house, you go to an expert and ask, how can I get help with the water? It's flooding out in my house. I need some help with that. You aren't so proud that I wouldn't like to ask for help. But sometimes we have that pride when it comes to our own health, or at least our psychological health. But of course, if we have problems, we should ask them who know something about it. We don't need to walk the way, a new way of everybody. We can also ask them that have gone on this road before to get some inspiration and some help.
That brings me to another question, because some people who are beginning to become conscious of spiritual matters and know that we're on an evolutionary path and are interested in spiritual matters, they can feel guilty about getting ill. They think, well, I should know better. Why am I not better than I am? And perhaps others who are on a kind of spiritual path can criticize them for being ill, and which in my opinion is very short-sighted. But I think you can see people feeling guilty that they've created an illness for their microcosmos and made their bodies or their minds suffer. Is that something you have met?
Yes, and in a way, maybe I've had similar thoughts myself. I mean, I think, as a psychologist, I shouldn't have these problems with with anxiety or something like that. But I mean, again, we have to see it from this broad perspective that this lifetime. Martinus once said that what a lifetime! It's like a wave by the shore. If you really look at it, the big perspective. And how can we demand from ourselves that we should have a knowledge that that is a process of many lifetimes? And I think so many of these guilt feelings is connected with a very short perspective on evolution. That you think, well, now I have the theoretical knowledge about this and that, so now I should be a genius, but practicing it. But you as a musician, you know that it's one thing to read a book about playing violin. It's another thing about being able to really play beautifully. And it's the same thing with this instrument, our body and our soul, that we have this problem that when we know theoretically, we often want to be a genius, jumping from a theoretical state to an automatic function. But that's impossible. So really understanding this process of the organic evolution, Martinus' worldview is really telling us that's a process of creating organs. And creating organs for thinking in a humane way is something that has to outconquer the animal habits of thinking. And they are often unconscious. We are not aware of a lot of these reactions, like victim consciousness or irritation, intolerance. They can be also under the surface of our day conscious. So we think, I think so nicely, but maybe I have some thought systems going on automatically they're not aware of, and they can create illness. And if we could change perspective and see, well, illness is a very good beginning of becoming aware of something that I have to release in my consciousness. See it as, well, it sounds maybe a little bit too much pathetic to say, but see it in fact as a gift for this possibility to evolve as a human being, because the body is telling a story about something that is unfinished within us, and we have the possibility to really cultivate this area of our consciousness. So if we could grasp that perspective, it will also help us come out of this old punishing consciousness that we have maybe built up through lifetimes in the old religious systems.
And at the same time, it's not helpful to be cynical towards people who are ill and say, well, it's your own fault. The idea is to develop our empathy so that it's 100%. And as you said earlier, if you've been ill yourself, then you better understand others who are ill. And we see the great success of support groups. There are many support groups for patients who have different illnesses, like heart patients will meet together, or diabetes patients, or cancer patients, so on, or people who've lost babies or whatever. They can support one another because they know how it feels. They're perhaps the most empathetic because they have been through the same, and that has been proven to be a great help. So Martinus encourages empathy for people who are suffering, along with this understanding that we do create our own circumstances. So this analysis, in my mind, certainly shouldn't lead to cynicism and saying, well, it's his own fault. Yes, but we have also a responsibility in relation. Like if I see someone who has fallen and broke a leg, I'm not going to just say, it's his own fault, and just leave him lying there. I would say, do you want me to call an ambulance? So cynicism has no place in this.
No, you could say cynicism is revealing that you do not have enough of experiences suffering at this area. When you are looking down at somebody who has an illness or something and just say that's your own fault, then you really lack empathy. And that shows that you have to be in a similar situation yourself in the future to get this emotional contact with what it means to be in that situation. So, yes, then you are asking for some future lessons.
So if we could try to sum up a little, do you have some short tips on what one can do to become healthy?
Well, as we said, one of the most important changes in our consciousness is to come out of this victim consciousness. And when we start to learn that everything we have in our surroundings is in fact a part of this living universe or this Godhead, And from this worldview we learn that everything in our fate has a purpose that is a positive purpose. It's helping us. That really helps us to come out of victim consciousness and to see that God is teaching us. So this change is very important for creating a long-term perspective for creating health. And another area in life where we also come into this, as Martinus calls, short circuits in our relations and thereby also in our system, own physical system, is when we try to change other people. We are so used to change the outer world, the physical world, with our force, and we have a tendency to believe that we could do it with our fellow beings, with our partners, with our children, and all this, you could say, manipulating or anger that wants to change the others is also kind of a short circuit in our own consciousness, but also in our relationships. It's kind of a war going on. So really growing in the capacity of letting people grow from within and give them the freedom to make their own experiences, to grow as a person. That is also a very important part. As we also said, it's important to release all the habits where we are living on the expense of others, like the animals, for instance. So the plant-based food is, Martinus says, he doesn't say you should eat vegetarian food. As we know, he gives us the freedom to grow from within, but he shows the consequences of different lifestyles, and we should, where we have the inspiration, try to get out of all the habits that are killing, so to say, other beings, also in the microcosmos. And as we said before, prayer is so important. You could say that we live in a universe that is alive, and this Godhead is the life force that we are surrounded by. And by praying, using prayer in everyday life, we connect to this battery organ, and we will realize more and more that it really gives us some life force to take challenging situations in a better way. And also, as we learn from this world perspective, there are guardian angels and so on that wants to inspire us in our tasks, if we give a lecture or if we have a consultation, or if we are a creative and so on. To be connected with this realm of inspiring beings on the spiritual side is also something that is also creating health. And the last thing I would also take up here is to really give us the freedom to do what we are longing for. Because when we follow our heart to do things, it could be art or science or voluntary work, where we really feel that this is something I'm inspired of. That is really also creating health, to do the things that you are inspired of. And some people think, oh, he's so selfish, he's just using time for things he's inspired of. But selfishness for me is when I'm doing something on the expense of others. If I'm creating art or science or things or doing voluntary work, it can be an inspiration for me. It can also be something that is good for other people. And that will be the future health. Number one is to really feel that you can be doing something that is really giving and inspiring for other people.
Thank you very, very much, Sören. And of course, we didn't mention sleep and exercise, but they're extremely important too. There's so much else one could say about health and ill health from a spiritual perspective, but I think our time is running out for now. So thank you very much, Sören, for joining us today on Good Friday.
Thank you very much.